tell you a little bit background about our story. About 7 years ago, I was running a small horticulture business in town as a landscape gardener, and started to recognise something inside me, a desire to be on the land, to be closer to the earth, and a desire to grow food in a clean and down-to-earth way. Yeah. My children were finishing secondary, tertiary school, and I recognised that it was time for me to have a life change. And at about this stage, I happened to pick up a copy of the Weekly Times, which I never, ever read. And it had an article about a family in Bransby that were growing garlic. And I was, sorry, I was just wrong. They were actually in Timboon. Yes.
The other people are very nice in Ransby. The Timboon ones were the ones that inspired me.
So I took this home and read it, and I started to think about garlic. And I recognised in that crop the potential for me to be able to actually focus on something and get my head around it. It's a once-a-year crop. It takes about 7 months to grow, and the rest is the use and processing and selling it. But I thought I could actually do this. It's not something with lots of. I'm not trying to grow 6 different vegetables at once. It's not incredibly work intensive as in physical work for a person in their mid-50s. At that stage I was. Yeah, so we started to look for land. We looked down around the Johanna Beach area and down around Foster, being within about 2 hours of Melbourne. At the same time, I thought about the Industry Association and started to follow up on the Australian Garlic Industry Association and discovered that it was sort of on its last legs. The industry had been decimated by the cheap Chinese imports. A lot of the big growers have given up growing garlic, and there were actually a handful of people still in that association. Their president was 82. So I thought, he was able to help a little bit. I needed advice on soil types and land, what sort of soil I needed. He was able to help a little bit, but we were pretty much on our own in that respect, in direct advice about garlic growing when we started out. So I figured I'd need at least 10 acres for crop rotation. We started looking at small farms, 10 to 20 acres. It was important. We were at the end of a drought at that stage, and I was aware of global warming. I saw high rainfall as being a really important element. We needed plenty of north-facing land and very productive soil. So that's how we ended up in Maboo. Yeah, as we were looking around, we found a number of farms that were in lifestyle. They were more lifestyle properties in areas of lifestyle properties, as in it was important for me to farm in an area surrounded by other traditional farmers, so I could benefit from their knowledge and make friendships and interact with a farming community. Yeah.
And here you are 5 years later. So I think it was fascinating when Kirsten did decide to start her research and discovered the association was really on, as you said, on its last legs. rather than just take up one bit of knowledge, she became involved in the association, and whilst hasn't always been a committee type person, took on the role of deputy chair of the board and was responsible for dozens and dozens of new members to joining, and now there's some 300 members in the association, and it's doing a great job. Just to say, we had one of those things, our kids' friends said, well, your parents used to get on so well, and why has Kirsten left you? And I could give her a lot of good reasons, but I was invited down for the weekends, and there was always, the list was there, and 5 years on the list is still there, and some of the same items are still on the list, and the shed's pretty comfortable to sleep in. Apart from all of that, our lives are about to change. I'm moving down from the city full time at the end of July. I've given notice for more work, and so we're hoping to really further develop the garlic crop. Anyway, we'd be happy to give you a bit of a look around, and no doubt there's experienced farmers and maybe some people who are looking at entering this area for the first time, and we'll try and address the balance of questions, and maybe if we can answer the questions, some of you can explain things to others of you. So anyway, enjoy the day.
Thank you very much for coming along today. Hopefully we'll give you a bit of a flavour, and a bad pun, of what we do and some of the processes. Our aim is to sort of go through not just here's what you do with garlic, but here are the processes and the thinking, the decisions we went through when we started 5-6 years ago. First of all, pre-purchase considerations, and then what are some of the things we did in terms of our site planning, our regeneration work on the soil, our planting, and then some of the investment decisions or decisions not to invest, and how we work through that. Because talking to a friend who's probably the most awarded and recognised garlic grower in Australia, Letitia Ware from Tasmania, she said to me last week, David, 75% of people who start growing garlic commercially in Australia are out of it within 3 years. And they typically take the broadacre farming route of saying, oh, I've got 20 acres, I'll put 5 acres of garlic in, and all of a sudden they've got no customers, they've got no one to buy it. They have to invest in a high level of capital to do that, and then they've got the wrong varieties, too much of this, too much of that, planted too deep, all the sorts of mistakes that you make. So one of the first things that was recommended to us is that, just get your hands dirty, do things manually for the first couple of years till you really understand what you're doing with the crop. And because garlic's amazing, I suppose, just like many crops, but it does tend to adapt. The garlic that we've had in our, for a couple of years in our soil really starts to perform well because it's acclimatised. It's got to enjoy the place. Anyway, so we're on 10 acres of brown loam soil. It's been basically pasture for 80 to 100 years. We've got 2,000 square metres of planting, which we'll go out to in a minute, just two plots, if you like, with 5 varieties of garlic. We've got some cattle, not very many, but about 5 of them, who tend to,
Just keep the pasture in line.
Yeah, we met them.
Oh, you did?
They're very friendly.
So they've got responsibilities for the future of the paddock, so we consult with them regularly. You probably saw also the 2 steep gullies that we've reforested. Within a week of coming here, Kirsten had got onto land care. Jill Vella came out, started looking at what we should be planting, and then when we got to be involved with the land care group, people said, oh, why didn't you ask us to help? And we said, oh, we didn't feel we could because we're sort of new guys and
Didn't know anyone.
didn't know anyone.
But we got funding for that planting through land care from the Water Catchment Authority, which was great. We should go out.
We will in a sec, just to reduce the amount of time. When we go out, we'll have a look at the 2 plantations, we'll look at the cover crop. Just a few decisions that we took were, partly when looking for the land here, we wanted north-facing land and northwest-facing land, but with a very, quite gently sloping was important, it's been interesting because we originally thought we could go much further east on the land, but then the arc of the winter sun is too low, and there's also, just as Benita was saying, when you have that look at where are your wet points, your 4s and 5s and things, we can put another 2 or 3 on the north facing and the northwest side. We can't go any further east where we were thinking we would because of the arc of the sun in winter. There's just not enough winter sun as we get down, and the ground does drop away, and there's also poor drainage in that area, and there are the drainage at the bottom is not as good as it is at this level here. But we also do use raised beds. We've identified some weaknesses in the method at the moment. Our beds need to be better formed because we haven't had as good productivity in the middle of the beds because they're sinking a bit. They should be convex, whereas they were a bit concave. We have to tidy that up. Green manure crop, Kirsty, tell us what's in there.
So from the garlic seminar that the association ran once a year, we got some tips from Graham for our presentation, and we popped a green manure crop in, which has done better than my usual attempts.
This is what it's meant for.
Yeah, usually I plant a few peas and Joe comes over and says, "That's not nearly enough, that'll do nothing." So in here, Graham gave us 5 different categories to include in the green manure crop, and I've taken a variety of things from those categories. We've got millet, sorghum, peas, mustard, tillage radish, forage rape, red clover and subclover. And I was supposed to have a tuna pod in there, but I couldn't find one and I didn't quite know what they were.
So don't tell Graham, right?
Quinoa and beets. Yeah. Okay, so next time.
So we won't get that.
Yeah.
So we won't get that fancy
Thank you.
effect he spoke about this year, but next
we'll
year.
get that in.
What ratios? Did he tell you what ratios to put it in, or just like you said, 1% of the? Yeah.
He didn't actually, but I planted twice as much as I was supposed to.
Okay.
So that's probably twice as thick as it's supposed to be.
Okay, look, quickly, we're short of time, so we'll cover a few other issues. Selecting the cultivars was an important question for us, and at the time, very few local growers. There was no real industry body. There was only half a dozen members, so it was a bit of a challenge there. So Kirsten went to council to see if there was any knowledge base around the region, which there wasn't. So we then started, essentially, we got 6 or 7 different varieties, 5 varieties, and sure enough,
they all failed.
It was a whole lot of crap. So quite a quarter acre of crap. We were quite excited bringing this first harvest in. We thought it looked a bit dodgy, but yeah, no luck.
To the cattle. So the first mistake we made was, as a quarter acre space, this was probably at least twice as big as a reasonable test patch. I should have probably gone for about a quarter that size, and it would have done just as well. So in the loss that I had, it would have been a quarter as big. But as it was, it was a lot of work and it wasn't a waste of time because I learned a lot. I planted soft necks and silver skins, and the soil and climate didn't like them, and they side shot and looked really, really bad. So the cattle went well on them. They had really smelly breath and really, really shiny coats, and they had a great time. Yeah. So then we talked to a few other growers up in northern Victoria, and we bought in a turban variety, and that did really well.
Okay, so a couple of things to consider, which we did is now, partly because it takes the pressure off us, is to have an early and a late season variety. So we plant the turban varieties, which is largely be this plantation, in April, and due to some learnings from last year, we'll be planting the Creole varieties, which are the long life varieties, in this patch in mid to late June. That does 2 things. It means you get a spread of garlic, you're spreading your workload, you don't need to have the same degree of shedding, so you get, say, 4 tonnes potentially out of half an acre, but our storage room takes 2 to 2.5 tonnes, and our curing area we can cure comfortably 2 to 2.4 tonnes in the space of 1 carport. So it's just a matter then of saying, well, okay, it makes sense then to mix your harvest times with the product. Yep, that's okay.
Should we move into the shade?
Couple of things to say.
Estimated quantities for planting?
Well,
The estimated quantity is a tonne per hectare. So I don't know how it equates, but we put aside our planting stock of about 200 kilos per 1,000 square metres. Is that right?
yeah, that's about it. But we do plant, because we've got a very exposed area and we've got a good airflow, we plant the crop at about 150 millimetre squares. First lesson we had in year 2 was don't plant too deep, because someone might have come along with their undercutter and chopped the bottom off your garlic. But we don't blame Joe for that. We just planted it too deep.
So what we do is when we see the first little green shoots start to appear on random garlics, we go, okay, time to
They're
plant.
the early birds. Everybody else will be 3/4 of the way up the stem.
That's how you
So,
know. The garlic tells you.
okay, then the question is the planting. Different schools of thought. From experience, we've learnt that we plant probably 5 to 8 millimetres, just below the surface. We plant by hand because we've done that economics exercise. Do you buy a cheap planting machine from Asia, $2,000 or $3,000? Do you buy a $12,500 planting machine from Europe? Then you say to yourself, well, then I've got more dependence on Joe, our tractor man, because we haven't invested yet in the tractor. So we look at these capital issues and we said we found an extremely good group that come on time each year. It's $1,000 for them to plant that for the group for the day. Then we spend about $1,200 to $1,500 on sugarcane mulch. We've looked at a range of options. We planted, we looked at buying it. Thankfully, our local hardware has a sugarcane mulch on special every March. So we just ring up and they say, oh yes, 3 months time you want a couple of pallets of sugarcane. Fine. We worked out we can ring up Rocky Point in Rockhampton. It'll be $7 at the factory or at the gate, and it'll cost us more than $3 to bring it down. So at $10 it works well. And you'll see in some of the pictures inside the shed, taken in September, that's 5 months after we mulch. There's still good thick mulch evident on the beds, keeps the weeds down, and so then we manage weeds through really a bit of hand planting or hand weeding in the channels. We are exploring the use of weed gunnel, which is like a plastic which is put over a formed bed. It's a mesh of plastic. But basically it gets machined, rams it in and sort of sits in over the beds. Your beds would be about 25 to 30 centimetres high, and the stuff just is wrapped in and forced in the ground around them. And then it's a question of there's any number of ways you can look after your channels, but
Can you source the council mulch from it?
we don't like to source it because
We're just worried about funguses that might have in it.
what's going to be in there. We know the sugar cane is as clean as what it is,
Yeah.
and it's a consistency and it spreads. And even though we've got a really windy area here, it holds down. And we put it down directly after the same day as we put the garlic in, and then within about a week we start to see the garlic coming up and it finds its way up happily. Yes. So that's one of those decisions, just as we said, and we'll see the methods we use for curing. For us, it wasn't right to rush in and buy the technology. We are now looking at buying a topping machine, because we'll take you to the other end of the cycle. Because when the garlic's of course fully grown, you've got to say when do you harvest, and it's really, we find for us, for our early varieties, it's 19th of November. For some reason that's the day in South Gippsland, in Merbau, where the garlic says I'm ready. And sometimes we say, oh look, no you're not. And of course a week later it's getting soft at the neck and it's going, this is all too hard. And a week makes a big difference, so I think it's really significant that small areas of time around harvest for garlic can really reduce your yield.
Probably one of the most time important factors, timing the harvest properly. Because if you leave it in too long, the skins start to become brittle and the garlic starts to break open. Then it becomes a real nightmare and you can't market it. And yeah.
So look, that's going to happen anyway, but essentially, yeah. Okay, what we might do is we might go inside and have a quick look at the curing and storage methods. But just as we do, to get it up out of the ground, Joe comes along with his onion lifter, and that just loosens the roots, agitates the soil, undercuts the roots, and then we have a team of volunteers at the moment. Just very quickly, there's a couple of sets of pictures. The two ones I'd like you to look at, apart from the beautiful food here, which is some value-added stuff we've been doing with some chefs from Malaysia. We bring the garlic in. Thanks to Joe, we made some half-sized onion boxes, and so at the moment we just put 50 kilos of garlic in the base, put some sliders in, mesh on top, another 50 kilos, and then we just progressively add crates to the 4 crates high, so 400 kilos, wrap it in plastic, stick one of those steel domes on the top, lids, and we've got 4 fans set up there. So we have 4 sort of stacks of boxes, wrap it in plastic, turn the fans on, and that sucks air up through, and in 2 weeks we can cure 1.6 to 2 tonnes of garlic in that area, which means otherwise we would have had a shed at least this big, if not bigger, to build just to store us just the garlic for curing. Interestingly, a few people we were the first people that we came across in the sector that were doing this with garlic. Yet the French came over and did us a story on all the wonderful French methods. Guess what? They're using huge fans, 300 kilogram bins on a massive scale. So this is a bit like a homegrown version.
We have already topped and tailed the garlic out in the paddock before we bring it in and put it in the drying boxes.
And
that's very labour intensive.
So right now we're just going to buy a topping machine where it goes up and down the aisles and it just takes the top, third of the green matter off. So then you do your undercutting, and then you can lift the material, lift the garlic straight up, give it a shake, put it in the crate, put it in for curing. So it'll take a lot of the process steps out, which is where your labour cost is. That whole process of getting it out of the ground into the curing. Then the next process step, if it's expensive, is the cleaning. And we converted a woodshed and sort of a breezeway into, I'd like to call it a temperature controlled room, but it really is about 5 to 6 degrees cooler in there than here. And we will be finishing that off with some, better doorways, extra flooring, sealing it off over winter. And we can fit about 2 to 2.5 tonnes of long life garlic. Real key message is there, use the infrastructure you've got, and then don't rush into capital decisions. If you happen to have all the kit, fine. You might decide planting machines are your go, but if it means buying a tractor, depending too much on someone else's time, you've just got to work out your own path. So I suppose that's...
The other key issue about storage is that garlic likes to be stored somewhere between 20 and 10 degrees. Once it starts to get down below 10 at night, or even below 5, which it does here a lot, the garlic will start to reshoot, so you just won't be able to store it. What we've had to do in the past is put it in the house. Makes the house very smelly. Yeah, and with 4 tonne, that's a potential crop, we couldn't fit it in the house.
We'd be sleeping in the shed and the garlic would be in the main bedrooms.
And we're always happy to have people visit the farm if you want to go into anything in more detail.
And phone numbers on the website. Time. We actually do have phone numbers on our website. So.
Yeah.
Right guys,
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
It's a pleasure.